Sometimes, the people who leave you behind are the same people who later beg to stand beside you again. Snow pressed softly against the giant glass windows of Terminal 5 at O'Hare International Airport, while Evelyn Carter stood beside a silver luggage cart, gripping the handle so tightly her fingers had gone pale. The terminal smelled like roasted coffee, expensive perfume, and melting snow dragged in by designer boots. Around her, families laughed beneath warm yellow lights. Flight attendants rolled polished carry-ons across the marble floor, and somewhere in the distance, a child cried near the security line. But none of it felt real anymore. Not after what her mother had just said. "We already upgraded the seats, Evelyn," Linda Carter sighed, adjusting the collar of her cream wool coat without even looking at her daughter. There wasn't room for another ticket. Evelyn blinked slowly. "Another ticket?" she asked quietly. Her older sister Savannah avoided eye contact while scrolling through her phone. Daniel smirked beside the check-in counter, the sleeves of his navy cashmere sweater folded perfectly over his watch. "Come on, Ev," he muttered. "You're 28. Figure it out." Behind them, first-class boarding tags hung from every suitcase except hers. Evelyn looked down at her own worn beige duffel bag sitting alone near the counter like it didn't belong with the others. That was when she realized this wasn't an accident. Her ticket had never existed. Her father finally stepped forward, lowering his voice like he was explaining something reasonable to a child. "We needed this trip, sweetheart. After everything that happened with the business." He paused. "You understand. The business. The family company she had emptied her savings account to help keep alive 18 months earlier. The same company they blamed her for when investors pulled out." Evelyn swallowed hard. The giant departure screen above them flickered blue and white across her face while announcements echoed overhead. "Flight 247 to Aspen now boarding at Gate C19. Savannah let out a soft laugh. "Honestly, this might be good for you," she said. "You've been stuck." "Stuck?" Evelyn stared at her sister's diamond earrings sparkling beneath the terminal lights and remembered skipping rent payments 2 winters ago so Savannah wouldn't lose her bridal venue deposit. Daniel zipped up his coat and grabbed his passport. "Maybe next Christmas," he said casually, "when your life's less depressing." The words landed gently. That was the worst part. Not anger, not cruelty, just indifference. Like leaving her behind was the most natural thing in the world. Her mother stepped closer then, lowering her voice one final time. "Try not to make this dramatic, Evelyn." And just like that, they turned away. For members of the Carter family walked toward TSA without looking back once. Their polished shoes disappeared into the moving crowd while Christmas music played softly through hidden speakers above the terminal. Evelyn stood frozen beside the window as snow drifted outside across the runway lights. Her phone battery died in her hand. Black screen. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. A few seconds later, she saw it through the glass. Her family climbing into a black airport SUV on the other side of security, laughing about something she couldn't hear anymore. The driver shut the door behind them, and the vehicle disappeared into the falling snow. Evelyn looked down at the dead phone resting in her palm. Then slowly, she sat down beside her duffel bag in the middle of the crowded terminal, surrounded by strangers rushing home for the holidays. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Carter understood exactly what it felt like to become invisible. The airport grew quieter after midnight. The bright holiday energy faded into the soft hum of floor polishers, distant boarding announcements, and the occasional squeak of rolling luggage crossing the empty terminal. Evelyn Carter sat near Gate C19 with her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring at the thin layer of snow sliding down the giant windows beside her. Her duffel bag rested against her boots. Everything she owned was inside it. 2 sweaters, a laptop with a cracked corner, a folder full of unpaid bills, and an old family photo she had forgotten to throw away. The cleaning crew moved around her like she was invisible. Somewhere nearby, burnt coffee filled the cold air. Evelyn rubbed her hands together slowly, trying to bring feeling back into her fingers while replaying the last 5 years in her mind like scenes from someone else's life. There was a time when the Carter family used to call her the responsible one, the dependable daughter, the quiet daughter, the one who always stayed. When her grandmother got sick, Evelyn had dropped out of Northwestern during her final semester to move back home and help. Savannah had cried for exactly 3 minutes before flying to Miami for a beach vacation. Daniel claimed he was too busy growing the family business. So Evelyn stayed. She drove her grandmother to appointments every Tuesday morning. She learned how to organize medications. She slept in hospital chairs that smelled like disinfectant and old blankets while answering business emails for her father between midnight and sunrise. Nobody called her selfless back then. They called her practical, useful. And when Carter Luxury Interiors started losing money 2 years later, her father sat across from her at the kitchen table with exhausted eyes and trembling hands. "We just need help getting through this quarter," Richard Carter had whispered while rain tapped softly against the windows. Evelyn still remembered the untouched cup of coffee beside him growing cold. She emptied her savings account the next morning. $38,000. Every cent she had left after leaving school. "You are saving this family," her mother told her that night while squeezing her hand at dinner. But families like the Carters only remembered sacrifice when it benefited them. 6 months later, when investors pulled out and the company nearly collapsed anyway, the story changed. Suddenly Evelyn was emotional. Bad with money. Too soft for business. Daniel started introducing her at parties as the reason Dad almost lost everything. Savannah once laughed about it over wine with her friends while Evelyn stood 10 feet away carrying trays from the kitchen. The worst part was not the cruelty. It was how normal it became. Slowly, invisibly, Evelyn stopped existing as a daughter and became a cautionary tale instead. A disappointment everyone politely tolerated. She blinked hard and looked toward the empty security checkpoint across the terminal. Her family was probably halfway to Aspen by now, drinking champagne 30,000 feet above the clouds while pretending she had ruined another holiday by being difficult. Her stomach tightened quietly, not from anger, from realization. They had planned this. The missing ticket, the careful excuses, the way nobody seemed surprised. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the family photo still peeking from her bag. It had been taken 8 Christmases ago in Vermont. Her father's arm rested proudly around her shoulders back then. Savannah smiled perfectly into the camera while Daniel held a glass of whiskey beside the fireplace. Evelyn studied her own face in the photo for a long moment. She barely recognized the girl smiling back. Then, without hesitation, she slid the picture into the nearest trash bin beside her chair. The photograph disappeared beneath crumpled napkins and empty coffee cups, while snow continued falling outside the dark runway windows. By 3:30 in the morning, the terminal lights felt colder. The holiday crowds were gone now, replaced by exhausted travelers sleeping across connected airport chairs with jackets pulled over their faces. Outside, snow covered the runways in a pale silver glow while baggage trucks moved slowly through the storm like shadows behind the glass. Evelyn Carter sat quietly near an empty charging station, her knees pulled close beneath her coat. She had stopped checking her phone hours ago after finding a single text from Savannah. "Hope you are not making everyone feel guilty right now." No apology. No concern. Just irritation. Evelyn stared at the message until the screen dimmed again. Then she deleted it without replying. Her stomach ached softly from hunger. The last thing she had eaten was half a granola bar sometime before sunset. Across the terminal, a coffee stand was preparing to close for the night, and the smell of cinnamon and dark espresso drifted through the air every time the employee opened the machine. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and counted the money she had left. $47.16. That was all. $47 after sacrificing years of her life for people who could not even leave her enough money for a cab ride home. She let out a slow breath and leaned her head back against the cold wall behind her. Somewhere overhead, a delayed flight announcement echoed through the speakers. A baby cried briefly. Then silence settled over the terminal again. That was when she noticed him. An older man sitting alone several rows away near the large runway windows. He wore a charcoal overcoat with dark leather gloves resting neatly beside him, and a small carry-on sat untouched at his feet. He was not staring at his phone like everyone else. He was reading an actual newspaper beneath the dim airport lighting while snow reflected across the glass behind him. Evelyn looked away after a second, but a few minutes later, she realized he had moved closer. Not enough to feel intrusive, just enough for her to notice the cup of coffee he quietly placed on the empty seat beside her. Fresh steam curled into the cold air. "You look freezing," he said calmly. His voice was low, controlled, almost effortless. Evelyn hesitated before looking at him directly. His hair was silver at the temples, his posture straight despite his age. There was something expensive about him that had nothing to do with clothes. The kind of presence people did not question. "I am okay," she answered automatically. The man gave the smallest nod, as if he expected the lie. "Of course you are." He returned to his seat afterward without another word. No questions. No pity. Just silence. Evelyn stared at the coffee for nearly 30 seconds before finally wrapping her hands around it. The warmth burned her palms gently. She closed her eyes for a moment as the scent of hazelnut and espresso filled the air around her. It was the first kindness anyone had shown her all day. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed something else beside the cup. A dark business card. No company logo. No address. Just a name pressed into the thick black paper with silver lettering. Adrian Hale. Beneath it was a phone number, written in clean minimalist font. Nothing more. Evelyn turned the card over once. Blank. She looked up toward the runway windows again, but the man was already gone. Only the faint reflection of falling snow remained against the glass. A few hours later, just before sunrise painted the sky pale blue over Chicago, Evelyn stood near the bus ticket counter wearing the same wrinkled coat and carrying the same worn duffel bag. New York City. One-way ticket. $39. The cashier printed the ticket while chewing gum and barely glancing at her. Evelyn slid the last bills across the counter with trembling fingers. The remaining money in her pocket after that was $8.16. She folded the ticket carefully and looked once toward the giant terminal behind her. Nobody came looking for her. Nobody called her name. And somehow, that hurt less than she expected. Then quietly, without another word, Evelyn Carter walked toward Gate 14 and disappeared into the gray winter morning. New York smelled different in December. Not clean like Chicago after snowfall, but heavy and restless, like steam rising from subway grates mixed with rainwater, gasoline, and burnt pretzels from street carts that stayed open past midnight. Evelyn Carter stepped out of the bus terminal in Manhattan just after dawn with her duffel bag hanging from one shoulder and cold wind cutting through the thin fabric of her coat. Yellow taxis splashed dirty slush onto the sidewalk, while strangers rushed past her without slowing down. Nobody looked at her long enough to care where she came from. Somehow, that felt comforting. Her breath trembled softly in the freezing air as she stared up at the rows of gray buildings disappearing into the cloudy sky above her. Everything felt enormous. Loud. Fast. She had $8.16 left in her pocket and nowhere to go. The coffee shops were already full of people in long coats typing on laptops beside fogged-up windows. Delivery trucks blocked entire streets while horns echoed endlessly between buildings. Somewhere overhead, a helicopter crossed the pale morning sky. Evelyn tightened her grip on the duffel bag and started walking. The first week nearly broke her. She spent 3 nights inside a 24-hour laundromat in Queens because it was warmer than sleeping outside. The fluorescent lights buzzed all night above rows of spinning dryers while she sat in the corner pretending to wait for clothes she did not have. Sometimes she would buy the cheapest cup of coffee from the vending machine, just so the owner would not ask questions. During the day, she searched for work. Hostess jobs. Retail jobs. Anything. Most places never called back after seeing her outdated resume and exhausted face. On the 6th day, a small cafe on West 48th Street finally hired her to cover holiday shifts after another waitress quit unexpectedly. The manager barely looked at her during the interview. "You can carry trays?" he asked. Evelyn nodded once. "Then you start tomorrow." The cafe was narrow, crowded, and always smelled like dark espresso and cinnamon syrup. By 7 every morning, businessmen in expensive coats filled the tiny tables near the windows, while jazz music played softly from old ceiling speakers. Evelyn learned quickly. Smile. Refill coffee before they ask. Memorize orders. Ignore rude comments. Keep moving. Her feet ached constantly after 10-hour shifts, and at night, she rented half of a tiny apartment in Brooklyn from a woman named Teresa who worked double shifts at Mount Sinai Hospital. The apartment was barely 400 square feet. The radiator hissed loudly all night, and the kitchen sink leaked into a metal bowl that had to be emptied every few hours. But the room had a lock on the door. For the first time in months, Evelyn had something that felt almost safe. Slowly, routines replaced survival. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, tied her hair back, and rode the subway into Manhattan, while reading free business articles on her cracked laptop. At night, after work, she studied finance videos online in the laundromat downstairs because the internet there was free and the heat worked better than her apartment. Some nights, she fell asleep sitting upright beside the dryers while spreadsheets glowed faintly across her screen. And still, nobody from home called. Not her mother, not her father, not even Savannah. Weeks passed, then months. Winter deepened across the city. One icy evening in February, Evelyn was wiping down the cafe counter near closing time when she noticed a familiar black business card tucked carefully inside the pocket of her old coat, hanging near the kitchen door. Adrian Hale. She stared at the silver lettering for a long moment while snow drifted quietly outside the cafe windows. Then slowly, almost without thinking, Evelyn reached for her phone. The number rang only once before someone answered. Adrian Hale speaking. The voice was calm, precise, familiar enough to make Evelyn straighten slightly beside the cafe counter. Outside the windows, February snow drifted slowly across West 48th Street, while headlights blurred through the storm. Evelyn glanced toward the kitchen to make sure nobody was listening. "You probably do not remember me," she said quietly. "We met at O'Hare Airport a few months ago." A brief silence followed. Not confused silence. Recognition. "The young woman with the dead phone," Adrian replied. Evelyn blinked softly. Somehow, hearing herself remembered made her chest tighten more than she expected. "Yes," she answered. The sound of papers shifting came through the line before his voice returned. "You called later than I thought you would." Evelyn looked down at the black business card resting in her hand. The silver letters had started fading slightly at the corners for months inside her coat pocket. "I was not sure why you gave me this," she admitted. "Neither was I," Adrian said calmly. That answer stayed with her long after the call ended. 3 days later, Evelyn stood outside a tall glass building on Park Avenue, wearing the only blazer she owned. The navy fabric was slightly too big at the shoulders because she had bought it secondhand from a thrift store in Brooklyn for $12. Snowmelt soaked the edges of her boots while black SUVs lined the street beneath rows of silver office towers disappearing into the gray Manhattan sky. She hesitated before stepping inside. The lobby smelled like polished marble and cedarwood. Men in tailored suits crossed the floor carrying leather briefcases while soft piano music floated through hidden speakers overhead. Evelyn suddenly became aware of every cheap detail about herself. Her worn bag, her cracked phone screen, the frayed sleeve near her wrist. A receptionist looked up from behind a white marble desk. "Can I help you?" Evelyn swallowed carefully. "I am here to see Adrian Hale." The receptionist's expression changed almost immediately. Not warmer, sharper, respectful. 37th floor, she said. "Mr. Hale is expecting you." The elevator ride felt impossibly quiet. Evelyn watched the floor numbers rise while her reflection stared back at her through the polished steel walls. 34, 35, 36. When the doors opened, she stepped into a private office floor surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly beneath cloudy winter skies, while snow drifted between skyscrapers like ash. Adrian Hale stood near the windows with one hand resting inside the pocket of a charcoal suit. In daylight, he looked even more composed than she remembered. Late 50s, silver at the temples, posture perfectly still. The kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because entire rooms adjusted themselves around him naturally. He turned slightly when she entered. "You look less cold than the last time I saw you," he said. Evelyn managed the smallest smile. "That is progress, I guess." Adrian motioned toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit." The office was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere behind her. No family photos. No decorations. Just clean lines, dark wood, and silence expensive enough to feel intentional. Adrian studied her for a moment before speaking again. "Tell me something honestly, Evelyn." She looked up carefully. "Why did you really call me?" The question settled heavily between them. Most people asked where she worked, where she came from, what happened to her family. Adrian asked none of those things. Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly toward her hands folded in her lap. "Because I am tired of surviving," she answered softly. "I would like to become someone else now." For the first time since she entered the office, Adrian Hale smiled. It was small, controlled, but real. Then he reached toward a folder resting on his desk and slid it slowly across the polished wood toward her. "Good," he said quietly. Because survival is the least interesting thing about you. The folder Adrian Hale slid across the desk contained only 3 things. A non-disclosure agreement, a temporary access badge, and a handwritten note on thick white paper that simply read, "Observe everything. Speak carefully. Never confuse noise with power." Evelyn stared at the sentence for several seconds while late afternoon light reflected across the Manhattan skyline behind him. "What exactly is this?" she asked quietly. Adrian rested one hand against the edge of his desk. "An opportunity," he answered. "Whether it becomes more than that depends entirely on you." The next 6 months changed everything about her life, so slowly that Evelyn barely noticed it happening at first. Adrian did not hand her wealth. He handed her access. She started at the very bottom inside Hale Capital as a junior operations assistant with a salary barely high enough to move her out of Brooklyn. But for the first time since leaving Chicago, she was inside rooms where powerful people revealed who they truly were when they thought nobody important was watching. Evelyn learned quickly, faster than anyone expected. She learned how investors spoke when billions of dollars depended on a single sentence. She learned which executives treated waiters badly the moment deals started collapsing. She learned that confidence was usually quieter than arrogance. Every morning before sunrise, she arrived at the office carrying black coffee and a leather notebook filled with handwritten observations. Every night, she stayed later than everyone else, reviewing reports beneath the glow of Manhattan lights reflecting against the office windows. Adrian noticed everything without praising any of it directly. One evening after a 12-hour shift, Evelyn found him standing beside the conference room windows while rain slid slowly down the glass outside. "Why are you still here?" he asked without turning around. Evelyn glanced toward the stack of financial reports in her arms. "I wanted to understand why the Singapore acquisition failed." Adrian finally looked at her then. "And did you?" "No," she admitted honestly. "But I understood why everyone lied about it." For the first time, he looked impressed. That became the pattern between them. Adrian never comforted her. He sharpened her. He corrected the way she spoke during meetings, taught her how silence could force powerful men to reveal insecurity, explained why wealthy people watch reactions more carefully than words. "Most people enter rooms trying to be noticed," he told her once during a private dinner with investors overlooking Central Park. "Real power notices everyone else first." Slowly, Evelyn changed. The girl who once apologized before speaking disappeared somewhere between boardrooms, late-night strategy sessions, and endless mornings studying financial markets before dawn. Her wardrobe became cleaner, simpler, tailored cream coats, black heels, silk blouses without logos. Even her posture changed. Calm, controlled, deliberate. By autumn, people inside Hale Capital had stopped treating her like temporary staff. They started waiting for her opinion during meetings. One afternoon, a senior analyst dismissed a proposal too quickly during a presentation. Evelyn quietly pointed out 3 overlooked market trends without raising her voice once. The room fell silent afterward. Adrian said nothing during the meeting, but later that evening, he placed a small velvet box on her desk before leaving the office. Inside was a silver fountain pen engraved with her initials. No note, no explanation, just acknowledgement. Winter returned to Manhattan almost exactly 1 year after the night her family abandoned her at the airport. Snow drifted softly outside the office windows while the city below glittered in gold and white holiday lights. Evelyn stood alone inside Adrian's office reviewing investor files when she noticed a newspaper folded neatly beside his desk chair. Her eyes paused on a familiar headline near the business section. Carter Luxury Interiors facing final liquidation after massive debt collapse. Beneath the article was a photo of her father leaving a courthouse looking smaller than she remembered. Evelyn stared at the image quietly while snow covered the city outside. Then she folded the paper carefully and placed it back exactly where she found it. A few minutes later, Adrian entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee. He studied her face once before setting 1 cup beside her hand. "You saw the article," he said calmly. Evelyn nodded. Adrian loosened the cuff of his coat slightly before speaking again. "There is a charity gala next Friday," he said. "Most of Manhattan's financial elite will be there." He paused briefly. "Including your family." Evelyn looked out across the glowing skyline while the warm scent of espresso curled softly into the cold office air. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. The ballroom at the Langford Hotel glowed like gold beneath crystal chandeliers large enough to reflect across the polished marble floors. Waiters in black jackets moved quietly through the crowd, carrying silver trays filled with champagne, while a string quartet played near the center staircase beneath soft amber lighting. Manhattan's financial elite filled the room in dark tailored suits and silk evening gowns, their voices blending into a low wave of expensive conversation. Outside the towering windows, snow drifted slowly over Fifth Avenue. Richard Carter adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo for the third time in 10 minutes while trying not to stare at the investors gathered near the ballroom entrance. His face looked thinner now, older. The confidence he used to carry so naturally had been replaced with restless tension hidden beneath practiced smiles. Beside him, Linda Carter clutched a crystal champagne glass too tightly, while Savannah scanned the room, searching for familiar socialites who might still acknowledge her after the family scandal. Daniel stood near the bar pretending to look relaxed, though the irritation in his jaw betrayed him every few seconds. "Hale Capital is here tonight," Richard muttered quietly. "If we can just get 5 minutes with Adrian Hale, we still have a chance." Daniel scoffed softly. "People like Hale do not save companies that are already dead." Linda glanced sharply at him. "Then stop talking like that." None of them noticed the silence that slowly spread across the ballroom entrance moments later. It began subtly, heads turning, conversations pausing, a few executives straightening instinctively. Then the massive doors opened completely. Evelyn Carter stepped inside wearing a white satin gown that caught the chandelier light like liquid silver. The fabric moved softly against the marble floor with each measured step she took into the ballroom. Her hair rested neatly over one shoulder, and a long ivory coat draped effortlessly around her frame against the winter cold she had just left outside. But it was not the dress that silenced the room. It was her composure, calm, untouchable. The version of Evelyn standing there no longer carried the nervous energy of someone waiting to be accepted. She walked like a woman who no longer needed permission to belong anywhere. Daniel frowned immediately. "No way," he muttered under his breath. Savannah blinked twice, confusion flashing across her face. "What is she doing here?" Linda lowered her champagne glass slowly as color drained from her expression. Richard stared without speaking at all. For a brief second, none of them moved. Then Daniel let out a short laugh, filled with disbelief. "So this is her plan," he said quietly. "Find some rich guy and pretend she made it." But even he sounded uncertain now, because the people surrounding Evelyn were not reacting to her like someone's guest. They were greeting her first. Investors nodded respectfully as she passed. CEOs stepped aside without hesitation. One woman from a major venture firm crossed the ballroom just to shake her hand personally. Evelyn responded with calm smiles and controlled grace, never lingering too long in one conversation before moving naturally to the next. No desperation, no performance, just quiet confidence. Savannah leaned closer toward her mother. "How does she know these people?" she whispered. Before Linda could answer, the ballroom shifted again. Near the center staircase, Adrian Hale had just entered the event. The room responded instantly. Conversations lowered. Several executives moved toward him immediately, but Adrian barely acknowledged any of them. Instead, his attention moved directly across the ballroom toward Evelyn. Then something happened that made the entire Carter family freeze completely. Adrian Hale changed direction mid-step and walked straight toward her. When he reached Evelyn, he stopped beside her with the kind of ease that only existed between equals. He said something quietly enough that nobody else could hear. Evelyn smiled faintly in response. Then Adrian offered her his arm. Not possessively, respectfully, like a man publicly acknowledging exactly who mattered beside him. Around the ballroom, people noticed immediately. And for the first time all evening, the Carter family understood something far worse than failure. They understood they had completely underestimated the woman they left behind. The ballroom never fully recovered after Evelyn entered. Conversations continued. Glasses still clinked softly beneath the chandeliers, and the string quartet kept playing near the staircase. But something invisible had shifted beneath the polished surface of the evening. People were watching her now, not with curiosity anymore, with recognition. Evelyn stood beside Adrian Hale near the center of the room, while city lights shimmered beyond the massive windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Snow drifted softly outside, turning Manhattan into silver and gold beneath the winter sky. A server approached with champagne, and Adrian handed one glass to Evelyn before taking the other for himself. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. Evelyn looked toward the far side of the ballroom, where her family still stood frozen near the bar. Daniel was pretending not to stare. Savannah whispered something sharply to their mother, while Richard Carter looked increasingly pale beneath the warm lighting. Evelyn lifted the glass lightly between her fingers. "No," she answered calmly. "That feeling passed a long time ago." Adrian studied her for a second, then nodded once as though confirming something privately to himself. Across the room, the gala host suddenly stepped onto the elevated stage beside the orchestra platform and tapped gently against the microphone. The crowd slowly quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced with an easy smile, "before tonight's charity auction begins, we would like to recognize one of the most influential emerging partners in modern investment strategy." Soft applause moved politely through the ballroom. Evelyn remained perfectly still beside Adrian. The host continued, "Over the last year, Hale Capital has achieved some of the most aggressive recovery acquisitions in the country, guided in large part by a strategist whose market predictions have outperformed expectations at nearly every level." Richard Carter frowned slightly. Daniel folded his arms tighter across his chest. "Tonight," the host said warmly, "we are honored to recognize the newest equity partner of Hale Capital, Ms. Evelyn Carter." Silence hit the ballroom before applause ever could. Then suddenly the room erupted. Executives clapped. Investors turned toward her fully now. Several people near the stage stood first, followed quickly by others around the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected across hundreds of raised glasses, while camera flashes sparked softly through the crowd. But Evelyn barely reacted. She simply placed her champagne glass down on a nearby tray and walked toward the stage with measured, elegant composure. No rush, no visible emotion, just control. Near the bar, Savannah's face had completely drained of color. "Equity partner?" she whispered. Daniel stared openly now, disbelief hardening into humiliation beneath his expression. "That is impossible," he muttered. Richard looked physically smaller somehow, his shoulders lowering as realization settled heavily across his face. Evelyn stepped onto the stage beneath the warm gold lights while applause continued echoing through the ballroom. The same woman who once counted coins inside a laundromat now stood before the most powerful financial figures in Manhattan, wearing quiet confidence like armor. The host extended the microphone toward her. Evelyn accepted it gently and looked across the room. Her eyes passed over strangers first. Investors, CEOs, journalists. Then finally, they landed on her family. For one suspended moment, nobody moved. The orchestra had stopped playing completely now. Even the waitstaff seemed frozen beneath the chandeliers. Evelyn could see every expression clearly from the stage. Her mother's trembling lips, Savannah's confusion, Daniel's wounded pride, her father's regret arriving years too late. She could have embarrassed them publicly. She could have exposed every cruel thing they had done, every sacrifice they accepted without gratitude. Every moment they treated her like disposable luggage left behind during their climb toward status. But Adrian's voice echoed quietly inside her memory. Real power notices everything. It does not need to shout. Evelyn lifted the microphone calmly. "Thank you," she said softly. "A year ago, I learned something important." The ballroom remained completely silent. Some people only value you when they believe you are useful to them. Her gaze never left her family. And sometimes losing those people is the beginning of your life. That was all. No anger. No revenge. Just truth. Then Evelyn stepped away from the microphone beneath the glow of crystal light, while applause slowly rose around her once again. And somewhere near the back of the ballroom, Linda Carter quietly began to cry. The applause followed Evelyn long after she stepped away from the stage. It echoed softly beneath the chandeliers while the orchestra resumed playing somewhere behind her, but she barely heard any of it anymore. The ballroom lights reflected across polished marble floors as executives approached one after another to congratulate her. Hands reached toward her. Smiles. Respect. The same world that once would not have noticed her standing alone in an airport terminal now shifted carefully around her presence. But across the room, her family remained frozen near the bar beneath the warm amber lighting. They looked stranded somehow, despite standing inside one of the most expensive hotels in Manhattan. Evelyn accepted another quiet congratulations from an investor before excusing herself politely. She moved toward the balcony hallway near the edge of the ballroom, where the noise softened into distant music and low conversation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Fifth Avenue, glowing beneath fresh snow while black cars crawled slowly through traffic below, like reflections moving across wet glass. She stood there alone for a moment, breathing in the silence she had spent the last year building for herself. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Evelyn. Her mother's voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. Evelyn turned slowly. Linda Carter stood a few feet away, clutching her evening wrap tightly around her shoulders. Up close, she looked older than Evelyn remembered. Smaller too. The sharp confidence she once carried so naturally had faded into exhaustion, hidden beneath makeup and jewelry. A few feet behind her stood Richard, Savannah, and Daniel, all strangely uncertain now. Nobody seemed to know how to begin. Snow drifted quietly beyond the glass while the orchestra continued faintly in the distance. Finally, Richard stepped forward first. "You look well," he said softly. Evelyn held his gaze calmly. "I am." Silence settled again. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Savannah glanced toward Adrian across the ballroom before speaking carefully. "You could have told us," she said, "about all of this." Evelyn almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it revealed how little they understood even now. "Would it have mattered?" she asked quietly. Nobody answered. Daniel looked down briefly before rubbing one hand against the back of his neck. "Look," he muttered, struggling to sound casual. Things got complicated after the company started falling apart. Evelyn remembered the airport instantly. The polished floors. The dead phone in her hand. The way he laughed while leaving her behind. But her face never changed. "Complicated," she repeated softly. Linda suddenly stepped closer, emotion rising visibly in her eyes now. "We made mistakes," she whispered. "But you disappeared, Evelyn. You never came home." The words hung between them beneath the glow of Manhattan lights outside the windows. Evelyn looked at her mother for a long moment. Then slowly, she glanced toward the ballroom where Adrian stood speaking with investors near the staircase. Calm, composed, never once interrupting this moment. She turned back, toward her family afterward. "Because that airport was the first honest thing any of you ever did for me," she said quietly. Linda's face crumpled slightly. Richard lowered his eyes. Savannah blinked rapidly while Daniel stared at the floor in silence. Evelyn folded her hands lightly in front of her, elegant and still beneath the soft chandelier light spilling into the hallway. "You left me behind when I had nothing," she continued gently. "And for a while, I thought losing my family was the worst thing that could happen to me." Her voice remained calm, almost warm. But then I realized something. Snow continued falling outside the glass behind her. "The people who truly love you do not disappear when you become inconvenient." Nobody spoke after that. There was nothing left to defend. No argument strong enough to survive the truth standing in front of them now. Somewhere behind them, guests laughed softly near the ballroom entrance while waiters carried champagne through the crowd. Life continued moving forward. Evelyn looked at her family one final time. Not with anger. Not even with satisfaction. Just distance. The kind created when someone survives long enough to stop needing an apology. Then Adrian approached quietly and offered her his coat against the winter cold near the balcony doors. Evelyn accepted it with a small, grateful smile before turning toward the elevator hallway beside him. Her family remained standing beneath the chandelier light as she walked away without hesitation. And this time, when the doors closed between them, Evelyn Carter did not feel abandoned at all.